Hello, Anna. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm just going to give it a few minutes before I start my intro, and I see that you joined, so I'm assuming I can see when other people join. Hopefully they will. All right, yay. All right, hello, Annie. Excellent. You can see I'm already getting a little glistening. I'm in Kansas City. It's kind of hot here and humid, even inside my AC department. So I'm going to be sweating through this one, but that's okay because, poets sweat too. That is the truth. Um, but yeah. Sure. Why don't I introduce myself? I'm Ruth Williams, if you don't know me. Some of you who are going to join this evening, I think, already do know me. I am a poet, and I'm also a professor. And as I said, I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I teach out at a small private liberal arts college called William Jewell. And I've been writing since high school. And I've been writing poetry, although actually I began writing fiction when I was in junior high. So perhaps I'm a failed fiction writer who turned to poetry when I recognized that I didn't really have talent writing my awesome mystery stories, which was my passion when I was a junior high student. But I've been writing poetry since high school, and ever since I've been just going and going. And eventually I decided to put some schooling behind that. I don't think that everybody needs an MFA. I just saw a recent discussion about that on Twitter. And I would never say that you need to get an MFA. There was a really long thread about how much people had taken in loans. Thankfully, that I only took very minimal loans to cover the costs over my stipend. But I decided to get an MFA in poetry at Eastern Washington University in Spokane, and then I advanced myself even more. I wanted more, so I went and got a PhD in creative writing at the University of Cincinnati. And while I was there, I did a creative dissertation. And so that means I wrote a book of poetry and a critical kind of article apparatus to that. And that's what brings me to today. I guess now I'm a professor, so I'm teaching poetry. I also teach creative nonfiction and American literature and women's literature. So I get to teach a lot of different things, which is nice. As much as I love creative writing, I also just love reading and talking about books. So in some ways, I really enjoy what I'm doing, I guess. So yeah. I also will say that one of the things that brought me to writing, to be frank and not to go into my bio, but I think that when I was in high school, the thing that I loved about poetry was that I could communicate my emotions. And I know that's a kind of amateur, perhaps uncrafted, unshaped attraction to poetry. But when I was young, that was really the thing that got me excited. So now I'm here today, and I'm a much less pour your guts out, although not totally. Maybe I've just learned how to refine my guts. Anyway, so tonight I'm going to read from my first poetry collection. This is Flatlands, and oops, can't really see. Sorry, I've got the glare there. This collection actually sort of is a strange one. I didn't expect to be publishing this as my first collection. It just kind of happened. And maybe I'll get to that when I'm waiting for anybody's questions. But for now, I'll just say that it is about being from Nebraska, which is not something that I thought that I would write about. But I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska. And if you don't know anything about Nebraska, it's in the middle of the country. Some people call it the Midwest. Some people call it the Great Plains. You can call it whatever you want. Most people say they drove through it one time on I-80 on the way to the West Coast. However, I grew up there, and I felt like it was boring and there was nothing going on there. And why would anyone ever want to live there? And I recognize now that's just a teenager thing. It's just something that people think. Even if you live in Chicago, even if you live in New York City, you kind of think where you live is lame. But one of the things about Nebraska is it's very flat. And when I say that, people are kind of like, well, there's probably hills, and there are hills, but it's incredibly flat. If you thought that Iowa was flat, Nebraska is flatter. Iowa is actually hilly compared to Nebraska. And to me, flatness is kind of a boring thing. We don't really associate flatness with like a positive thing, unless you're talking about maybe your stomach. I think that's really the only thing I can think of. Or maybe your route for running, you want it to be flat. Otherwise, we think flatness is kind of, I don't know, like I said, boring, empty, nothing. So when I started thinking about what this book could be, after I'd written some poems about Nebraska, I started to explore that idea of flatness. So I'm going to start with my first poem, which happens to be the first poem in the book. And I think I'm going to read about 10 poems, and then I'll take any questions you might have. So the first poem is this poem that deals with this fact that I learned when I was in grade school, and maybe some others can relate to this, but when you were growing up, maybe you had a class in elementary school, or a segment, a unit maybe. Sorry, it's not a class when you're in elementary school. It's a unit, and it was on Nebraska history. And I don't remember much about Nebraska history, pioneers, farms, other things. But I do remember this one fact, which is that there's a giant fault line in Nebraska. And it goes, I think, from maybe the tip of Nebraska, maybe in one of the Dakotas, South Dakota, I'm not sure. And it goes all the way down into Kansas. And it's called the Humboldt Fault. And I remember that we learned that if it ever were to break, there would be a huge disastrous earthquake, which to me as a kid, you don't get earthquakes in Nebraska. That doesn't happen. We have had a few shakes in Kansas City, really, which may be related to fracking in Oklahoma. I don't really know. But in Nebraska, you don't really get those shakes. You don't get earthquakes. So to me, this idea that there was danger lurking was fascinating and interesting and antithetical to anything that I thought about Nebraska. So this poem is a little bit about that. Humboldt Fault. As children, we pirouetted, tipsy ballerinas tripping through wet grass. The great fault beneath, gap like an inverted lens, hidden beneath square shoulder fields, a fact we forgot by the end of grade school. Nebraska hypnotizes eyes with slow lines, straight highway blurring into horizon. Lulled in the strand of our history, we were like the Platte River, its mud sluice easy to follow out through the plains. The ready-made disaster, subtle as a shift in the wind, unreadable all around us. When I was thinking about Nebraska, I guess, as I said, I was really connected to the idea of flatness in the landscape because it seems so empty and so unremarkable. And when I went back to start kind of assembling what would become Flatlands, I was just looking up like things about landscape. And what I found was this term, and it's called physiography. And I'm just going to read the definition because it really fits, I think, what I was trying to explore in this book. So physiography is a subfield of geography that studies physical patterns and processes on Earth, and that those processes or patterns are things that shape the land. So understanding the forces that shape the land. I thought that's kind of what I think I'm doing, except that instead of the land, I'm looking at how the land has shaped me. So the physiography of me, really, which I suppose is entirely narcissistic, but I hope someone can benefit from this, or at least finds it interesting. So this one is called Physiography, and I think of it as kind of a linchpin in the book in some ways, even though it's not a title poem. All right, Physiography. Flatlands, the pat of a hand on your head, a good girl, a slicing edge, like a scythe through grass, you learn to love the sound of cutting hair, an ingrained lust for a portion reduced. You flat your body like a white wafer, and you mean it to be religious. Like a frontier church, you give yourself up to horizon, so being put in your place is like a cross on your flat back. In some ways, that's a very short poem, but I think it captures something about the way I feel about Nebraska. It's a little tense, and maybe that's how everyone feels about their home. I'm not sure. It's probably a universal truth that we all have complicated feelings about our homes. The next one I'm going to read is called Ignition, and it's a poem about something that happened when I was a child. I'm reading stuff from the first part of the book, which is very much about my childhood. Another topic I never thought I would write about. So Nebraska, didn't think I would write about it. Childhood, no, not really. No thanks. So somehow I wrote about these things I didn't think I would. I guess that's a lesson for us all. This poem is based on something that happened to me when I was pretty young. There's a giant 4th of July celebration, as there are in many cities in Lincoln, and it's out at this man-made lake. Yes, man-made, because there are not many natural bodies of water in Nebraska, called Holmes Lake. And the year that we went every year, I guess, for many years. And one year we went, it was really dry. There was like a drought or something. And at some point, the fireworks were going up, and they like caught fire too quickly, and they started going up really fast. And they were going up so fast that they weren't getting high enough, and like there were little shards of paper that was still burning. Like the internal parts of the firework had not totally exploded high up enough, and so they were like little cinders coming down. And eventually, the hill caught on fire. And I remember being like, what is happening? You know, and our parents made us leave, which was a big tragedy. So this poem is about that. Ignition. Fireworks rushed their explosions, stumbling, flung swatches of drunken color. The sky blurred, pink, yellow, red, a whirling slip of lights. We thought this must be what adults meant by intense. The red flare, a tongue reaching out, lapping from the clustered fuse. The hillside slowly bent under the sky's flame. Scorched paper sifted warm over our faces, heads. Tapping our shoulders, our parents turned us away. We tried to shake their grasp, look back. In the firelight, ash floated like loose hairs, pricking our cheeks in the cooling air. Riding home, even as we curled in the pocket of our parents' stillness, we kept the night's heat in our fists, ready to knock. I'm going to read the poem that ends the first section, and if you've taken a literature class in American literature, you might be familiar with Willa Cather. She wrote My Antonia and O Pioneers and Song of the Lark. I think those are her most famous books, if I had to say. She wrote other books as well, but she is from Nebraska, although I don't know where she was originally born on the East Coast. But when she was a child, her parents drug her out to Nebraska in the, I don't know, early 1800s, I mean, pioneer days, right? And she hated it. She was like, this is the worst place I've ever been. There's nothing here. We're completely isolated. Nothing's going on. I hate everything about it. But then she ended up writing about it. So in some ways I can see some echo of my own feelings about Nebraska, my own feelings about home, kind of coming to fruition in her work. And beyond that, her work is just so beautiful. If you're ever wanting descriptions of the prairie as it existed back in time, you should read O Pioneers and My Antonia. They're both really chock full of visions of what the prairie used to be like, which is like the sea, but with grass. Anyway, this poem is called Radio Plain, and it's not really about the prairie, but it has an epigraph from Willa Cather's book, O Pioneers. In that book, there is a female protagonist, and she is taking over the family farm, and it's a tense time. I don't remember the particular details because it's been a long time since I read it, but one of the details that I remember when I was putting this collection together was that the female protagonist has this recurring dream of this man who comes along and picks her up. And in some ways, it's a very like heteronormative kind of vision, but it's also deeply erotic and also deeply kind of about somebody wanting their burdens to be taken away, whether that's by a man, a woman, gender nonconforming person. I think we can all relate to that feeling. And there was something about it that I remembered even as I grew older. So I will read the epigraph after the title. Radio Plain. As she lay with her eyes closed, she had again, more vividly than for many years, the old illusion of her girlhood, of being lifted and carried lightly by someone very strong. She knew at last for whom it was she had waited and where he would carry her. In my 13th year, hanging the laundry, the white sheets were like blousy dresses, and my heartache was a new nostalgia. The plains, the leavening, grasses a long cry, the hair of my later years growing before me. How I spent that summer like Cather, wanting the strong arms of another coming round me, knowing that this too was a foretaste of what it meant to be flattened, to love like the dirt, hard, packed. How fertile then not to know what I would become. I'm going to jump to the middle section of the book, which is, I guess, in keeping with my kind of coming of age sort of organizational structure. It's kind of like the middle passage of young adulthood, or the encounter with love, or tangles of adult relationships. And this poem is sort of about that, maybe indirectly, but it's one of the first poems that I wrote when I moved to Kansas City. If you've never been to Kansas City, like many big old cities, it has these really beautiful boulevards, and some of them have flourished and some of them have fallen into disrepair through the various forces of gentrification and whatnot. And I happen to live kind of near one, which was called the Paseo, and it just recently got changed to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard or something. But when I first moved here, I loved the name Paseo. And I didn't know how to pronounce it, so I called it Paseo, which is wrong. But to me, there was something about passing on this Paseo that I really liked. And I was driving aimlessly because I did not know anybody in the city and I didn't know where I was going. And I just moved here and I had a lot of free time in terms of not knowing very many people. So I was trying to get a sense of the city. And this poem I wrote after one of those long drives where I almost got lost. Lengthy silences. Once cars were smooth riding greyhounds ambling across the pavement. Roads curved to appear, then disappear, like the erotic tease of a man wearing a necklace just below his shirt. At his collar, the bones lace, delicate, well-oiled. Lately, I have not been moved to seethe or suckle any one piece of skin, but lo, I have longed for the lengthened road, discovering the wide, old boulevards of the city, driving until my body's lost or scattered, a nostalgic sunset fragmenting sight. This next poem's called Light Posts, and there's really no explanation needed. It captures a moment in time, and I kind of describe that place that I was at. Light Posts. 60-degree weather, mid-January, porch door open, so I'm swimming in the slow wish of traffic, an old song from before I was born, playing in the other room, a woman's voice beautifully muffled. Is a trapped thing more alluring caught in the wrong season? I move my hands, cover the light to see what emerges when it springs back. Over the phone, the wind blows in another part of the country, and I hear it translated into something. I can't tell. Is it freeing itself from here or there? I've got two more poems, and I'm saying that because if you have any questions, you should think of them now and type them out, and I will answer them. And if you don't have any questions, I'll talk to you a little bit about what I said before, which is how this book came to be, the weird journey of it, which is probably mostly interesting to me, but hopefully will be interesting to you. So this one is called Dumbfounded. This is towards the very end of the book. And I've read this poem a lot at different readings, but I really like it. And someone who I know knows a choral director here. He started this like sort of, I don't know if it's like a cappella-ish group thing, chorus choir. That wasn't my wheelhouse when I was young, so I don't know what to call it, but they actually set this poem to music and had a choir singing it, and it was fascinating. And if you're curious, you can go to my website, ruthwilliams.com, and check it out. It was just cool to hear the way that the choir phrased the poem. It's called Dumbfounded, and it's about going home when you're an adult and being very confused by the way that your city changed. Dumbfounded. No need for driving rain to wash you. I prefer messes, I consoled myself. There wasn't anything true about that. I only wanted to write like a shirt turned inside out, tags gone cryptic upside down, to create a vague sense of discomfort, a rock in the shoe, a piece of floss stuck between teeth. Like driving around the city of your birth, but out where all the new shops went in. A set of cul-de-sacs to destroy you. Like a tonic, a talisman, you repeat, keep your palm on the left-hand side. No matter the maze, that's how you'll find your way out. And my last poem that I'm going to read today is towards the end of the book as well, and it's called Jackalope. And is the jackalope national? Can you get a postcard of the jackalope in, like, I don't know, what's the most unjackalope state that you could ever think of? Connecticut. Can you get a postcard of the jackalope in Connecticut? I don't know, but you can get one in Nebraska. The jackalope is supposedly a rabbit with, antlers. When I first saw a postcard of the jackalope, I actually thought for a second it was real. I was like, well, that seems plausible. That could happen. I mean, that seems like something that could exist in nature. That's not the case, but I ended up writing this poem because I was thinking, on the prairie, often you can't see things except for like flowers if you're looking really closely, but the prairie has a uniformity to it. And that's, like I said, it's not actually uniform. When you get close up, there's lots of things there. I'm sure there's lots of animals in the grasses and things, but when you are from afar, it's going to look empty. It's going to look like nothing. And I guess that goes back to my first poem. The surface of Nebraska looks like flat, but underneath there's this huge thing waiting. There's this tension there that when released would be quite catastrophic. And so I guess this is nothing is what it seems. So this poem is a little bit about the mysticism of the jackalope. Jackalope. The prairie demands décollage. In strips, tear the grass away to a light hair. The horns, a shadow branch that oscillates in a mythic drowse. The hair around each bone moves lightly, as if bewitching. Touch it, and now you're outlined, torn into shape. Oh yes, you're being found. All right, I think that concludes my reading portion. I will scroll down here and see if you have some questions. Okay, so what can I tell you about my writing process, how I find things to write about, and how I end up writing about things I didn't think I would. Sometimes I don't have anything to write about, and I happen to be someone who doesn't usually know what they're going to write about when they sit down. Poets are very intentional, and they have like an idea generated, and I'm more of like a sit down, write something. It's usually really bad, and I can't look at it because I'll just delete it all. And so what happened is a long time ago, when I was doing my MFA, I ended up writing a few poems about Nebraska, and I kind of never really pursued it beyond the smattering that was in my MFA thesis. And when I came and moved to Kansas City, it was the first time I'd lived close enough to Nebraska to actually go and drive home, like easily. So in a long time, since college, really. So I found myself driving up there to visit my parents who still live in Lincoln. And I was just kind of thinking about being from this area and how my attitude toward it had totally changed. My mother and I went to the Willa Cather prairie. It was so beautiful. And I was like, you know, when I was young, I would have thought it was so boring. And when I go back to Lincoln, I'm like, oh, it's so wonderful, so nice. There's bike paths. Everything is great. You know, kind of completely the opposite of what I thought when I was a teenager. This is boring. There's nothing to do here. And so once I started to make that shift, I realized that I was writing these new poems, which were kind of about the Midwest. Maybe you're inflected by the circumstances of my life in Kansas City, lots of trains and things. And I realized I had a theme going. And I ended up kind of going back to the poems that I had written in my MFA and combining those with the new poems at the suggestion of my boyfriend, Joe. And I thought he was really ridiculous. And I was like, how could he think that this is a good idea? But I humored him. And once I did that, I realized, oh, there are these corresponding themes. And that in turn generated more. And so that's how I ended up writing about Nebraska, the thing I didn't think I would write about. It just kind of happened. All right. Oh, and I think I've inadvertently answered Mark's question as well, which is how did the distance allow me to write about Nebraska? And I think, Mark, you're completely right. It's all about going away. I feel like that's Willa Cather's example because she lived in Nebraska when she was a child and young adult. I think she went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, perhaps. And then she moved away. I think she moved to New York City. Don't quote me on that, but I think she lived most of her adult life there, or maybe perhaps in some other places. I think she spent some time in the Southwest, but she never went back to Nebraska to live there permanently. And yet, she wrote these wonderful books, and they are her most famous books, and they happen to be about Nebraska. And so in some ways, I think once you go away from home, it allows you to look at it through that new lens, and perhaps it allows you to create that distance and that romanticism. I'm thinking of Esther Perel's like Mating in Captivity for some reason. If you don't know Esther Perel, she's this French lady, and she gives advice about relationships, and she sort of has talked about the idea of how people who are in a relationship for a long time, they kind of, you get used to that person, you see them all the time, and sometimes that can have a negative effect on the way that you feel about that person. You know, you take them for granted or you just get bored. And then suddenly, if you go away, whether that's going away by distance or going away in other ways, you know, and then you come back, suddenly you have this new fervor for this person because you see them through new eyes, or you see them through a new lens, I guess. And I think that that is the case with home. I think that what sort of seems boring or reductive becomes actually a very interesting place. Maybe that's also just the process of getting older. I wonder about that. And I don't know if other people can relate to that, but I think that I see it both as a function of leaving home and also as a function of getting older and starting to go back in time. That sort of disturbs me. Getting older, going back in time, but it leads to some okay poems, I hope, and a book. So yeah. I hope that that answers your questions. I will say one more word about my process, and I didn't mention this before, and I want to give a plug to these folks, but I am this writer who usually just sits down and writes whatever is on my mind. I don't usually plan, but there's one exception to that. There's two exceptions. One is when I get inspired by a theme and then I start generating more around that theme. But I also got into a group here in Kansas City of just two other people. I do not meet with them and I do not talk with them, but we give each other a prompt every month and month and a half. And our prompts can run the gamut from silly to sublime, like sharks or blue, green, you know, simple things, 1 word, 2 words, that's it. And we take turns with the prompt. And what I've found is I end up writing a lot of poems I would never otherwise write that way. And I love the fact that we don't meet and we don't workshop, we don't discuss, we don't even give feedback. We may not even look at each other's work. It's simply this little ping to make us write. And there are several poems in Flatlands that wouldn't exist without that group, weirdly. I think there's a poem about the solstice. And yeah, it's kind of strange. I don't know how that happens, but that's another way I end up writing about things that I never would have thought I would write about. And so if you are looking for an easy kind of way of generating work, I highly recommend doing that and keeping it simple, because I feel like a lot of people, especially those of us who've been through the workshop scene, we want to make it like really official. We want to go to a coffee shop, we want to chat, we want to get feedback. And sometimes we don't actually need feedback. Sometimes we're at a place in our lives we just need to generate. I'm not saying that you should never have feedback or you should never have a workshop, but sometimes I just feel like I just need a kick to get myself started. So I hope that's some helpful tip. Anyway, well, I think my time is almost up. So I hope that this hasn't been too rambly. It's really fascinating to do this online. I think that I really enjoyed it, but also found it very strange because you usually get audience feedback. And so I'm alone, which has my like stand-up comedian, just rambly mode coming out. But I also kind of like the fact that I'm in my apartment, and that's so cool. So I want to thank Sandra. I want to thank Poets in Pajamas. I think this Poets in Pajamas thing is like a super awesome idea. It's like such an easy thing, and the readings are online if you missed getting into it. I think it's wonderful because a lot of people, you know, to go to a reading might be a burdensome thing depending on your circumstances or your mood, or right now, you know, the national news, like it's just a sad day really. And I think that that could be hard for some people. And so I love the fact that this kind of makes the bar to entry, you know, pretty low. And I think that's great. So thank you, everybody. And I hope that you enjoy your Sunday night. I am going to go cool down and get this humidity and anxiety sweat off my face. And I hope that the rest of your August goes well. I hope you have a good night. Goodbye.